Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 15 of Terpenes and Testing, the podcast. This broadcast is brought to you by Mace Media Group and Terpenes and Testing Magazine, the industry's first publication dedicated to cannabis science. I'm Jason Lupoi, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Terpenes and Testing Magazine, and I'll be your host as we navigate across the landscape of cannabis and psychedelic science. When I first joined Terpenes and Testing back in 2018, I was fortunate to already have access to a great advisory board. And this was important to me because there are many other people who have been studying cannabis in one aspect or another for a much longer time. Although many states still have neophytes to the industry, a likelihood with new states legalizing by the year, California has had legalized cannabis in some regards since 1996. And so that means that there are people with over 20 years of experience in a legalized market. And these folks have witnessed the fantastic evolution of our industry out of toxic reefer madness death throes to where we are today. In fact, they helped erect the foundation that we stand on. So for this episode, I wanted to speak with Dr. Jeff Raber. Dr. Raber is one of the advisory board members for Terpenes and Testing. And Dr. Raber received his bachelor's degree in biochemistry from Lebanon Valley College in Pennsylvania, and subsequently a PhD in organic chemistry from the University of Southern California, where he had an emphasis on developing new synthetic methodologies useful in pharmaceutical drug discovery and manufacturing efforts. Dr. Raber studied botanical phylogenetic relationships on the Rubisco enzyme's evolution while in college and was named to the USA Today 1997 All-USA Collegiate Academic Team for his research accomplishments in this area. After working in the fine chemical manufacturing space, Dr. Raber entered cannabis in 2010 and has since published 5 peer-reviewed articles on different cannabis topics, most notably around terpenes. In 2019, Americans for Safe Access named Dr. Raber the Researcher of the Year. And Dr. Raber has been invited to lecture about cannabis around the world, is an inventor on multiple patents pertaining to cannabis-based technologies, and is frequently sought out as a subject matter expert by the media, including this podcast episode, to comment on various technical topics within cannabis. So Dr. Raber, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate that.
So I guess to kind of kickstart the conversation here, in all of your time in this industry, how did things begin for you, and how has the industry evolved? And I guess as kind of a third little piece of that question, what have been some of the high and low points?
Sure. Loaded question. Good one. I started because my brother was at a construction company, and unbeknownst to them, initially, they were asked to build a storefront dispensary in Orange County, California. It was in a medical facility. They said, can you build out this little outlet? And they said, sure. And then they said, the plexiglass will go here. And they started scratching their heads wondering what was that meant for. And they came to find out that it was meant for a medical cannabis dispensary. And he comes home and he tells me, and I said, well, that seems crazy. Like, are you sure that's legal? He said they claimed it was legal under medical laws that had passed back in 1996. There was a voter initiative in California then, and there was SB 420 was also passed in California. I think it was 2007. It started some of the proliferation of some of these dispensaries. And this was the end of 2008. So in 2009, President Obama was on CNN and said, I'm going after drug trafficking organizations, not targeting any medical patients themselves. And I kind of thought that that was the entrepreneurial green light for, scientists or folks that had needs or could help a lot of folks, in need through the use of medical cannabis, if we could understand it and, start to control the supply chain. So how has it changed since then? I mean, that was voluntary testing. You see a lot of places now with mandatory testing due to laws and regulations, and we see much more the advent of adult use, being allowed in addition to medical cannabis rules and regulations. So that change is quite significant, to the option to test, to having to, make sure things are tested to certain quality standards before they hit the shelves. That's a huge piece. And I think some of the ultra low points, I would just say, is the vape problems of 2019, the valley scares that we had, and concerns along those lines of what might happen if some things are not watched and regulated properly, and to the ultra high points of adult use being permitted in Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and all the other states that have come after that, and really towards the continued, evolution and marching on of more and more states enabling medical access. I think more folks across the country, more than a majority, now have the ability to access medical cannabis products in some sorts, and we're getting to a chance to run the wonderful state-based regulation experiment so that we can learn from each of these types of structures how to best set up a framework for federal legalization, which hopefully is coming sooner than later.
Yeah, that's well said. And I on this upcoming Thursday, I'll have the opportunity to speak with Senator Street, who is a Pennsylvania senator, and he is actively working on legislation for both adult use cannabis in Pennsylvania. That's something that has been flirted with for probably 5 or 6 years now. You always kind of hear more of the political conversation about it and who controls the House and Senate, the Republicans or the Democrats. It's never really about like the actual industry or the jobs or the plant. But he's actively working on that, and he's also interestingly working on a bill that would allow Pennsylvania cannabis patients to pay for or to go through their healthcare provider for their medical cannabis, which that's pretty exciting.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that element of it. That's pretty cool. That would be good because I think that's one challenge, right? How do you bring these at the right cost if they're not reimbursed by healthcare or health insurance of some sort that can, all the other medications that help people typically are. So why couldn't this one? That's a pretty innovative step by that individual. It would be nice to see that one get through Pennsylvania.
Right, absolutely, and I'm not sure. I don't know how much Senator Street knows about the pricing of the industry or whatnot here in Pennsylvania, but I definitely plan to share some of that information because when you look at like a 500 milligram vape pen, for example, it's anywhere typically between 45 and now there's some solventless rosin pens on the market for around 85. And I don't know what most people's dosing habits are, but let's say that lasts you a week or two, if that, and then you're facing, let's say you're using it for pain relief, or you've got a 3 month supply of, insert medication for $10. So that price can be very preclusive to somebody actually utilizing the products, and in many cases it might be one of their best opportunities for better quality of life.
Yep. No, for sure. Those prices are pretty significant. I think that's one kind of stronger argument for why you should make it, fully adult use. It kind of breaks open the commodity piece and lowers the prices and increases competitiveness. So there's greater access for everyone in that fashion, lowers the pricing. Another great answer would be have healthcare, insurance reimburse it.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that would be pretty welcome by a lot of patients for sure.
Yeah, and that'll be the ultimate, hopefully the ultimate nail in the Schedule One coffin. If we're finally saying if healthcare is paying for it, it's definitely medicinal.
Kind of does suggest that, doesn't it? You can't hide behind the argument of there's no medical utility anymore. Yep.
So you guys at the Werc Shop, you started off as a testing lab, and you migrated into the realm of doing formulations. And so I was curious if you could just provide for us, what kind of services you provide to your customers.
Sure. So we help build custom formulations, combining terpenes, complex terpene formulations, along with cannabinoids of their choice. And there's a lot of different ways to get a lot of different cannabinoids today. So, mostly the THC is made locally on site. And that's another arm of our service. We will help manufacturers or those that need to manufacture design, go through construction, select extraction equipment, all the way through from plant extraction up through packaging of final packaged goods, ready for distribution, to say, how do I extract? How do I do it efficiently? How do I make the ingredients I need? How do I put that together with terpenes? How do I make an array of products and how do I bring them to market. So there's kind of pieces of which formulations do you want, how might they drive the product formats, are they from inhalation products to topicals to edibles, tablets or other orally consumable products, all the way, down to how might I differentiate myself over some of the other competitors. So we can kind of help them from the harvested plant material all the way up to finished packaged goods. And of course, all along the way, there's a lot of testing. You want to know what you have. You want to know that you're efficiently capturing it, making it into what you wanted to have, and then making sure everything is clean and free of contaminants all along the way. So how do I navigate the state testing regulatory pieces? How do I do testing that makes sense and doesn't make me go broke because it's not free? And how do I make sure I have high quality, standardized, reproducible products that could infinitely scale? So that if there is a good one that a lot of folks are finding benefits from, then I'm assured I can keep making that at any large volumes and not stuck for some sort of unforeseen reasons when I get started.
So as a product formulator, what styles of products have you seen as being the most popular for your customer base? And, you know, what do you think the future of these formulations will include? Like how will current product formulations evolve?
Sure. I mean, the most popular formats are inhalables, right? So vape cart products or even concentrates. So how might I go ahead and inhale these compositions? It offers rapid physiological response. It offers, titration of dosing. And there are a number of benefits to that, provided the ingredients in those things are, well monitored. They're watched and carefully added, and you're not adding something that may be deleterious to the individuals that are consuming them, which is a delicate balance in some sense. And I think that's one part of where we're trying to continuously educate regulators. We see a lot of conversation going on about it in Pennsylvania, in fact. What is in a vape cart? What should or shouldn't be in there? You definitely don't want to recreate problems like you've seen from the end of 2019 with EVALI. So how do you watch that in a mindful fashion to make sure that problem doesn't happen? So from our perspective as chemists, we think there are certain classes of molecules that are not going to do well in that type of vape product format or other inhalation product format. Things like, dicarbonyls or the buttery compound that form popcorn lungs. Or now we know about phenolic acetates and things like vitamin E acetate that could break down and form the molecule that was ketene that could then cause lots of harm in the lungs and airways. So keeping a mindful eye on that and kind of staying towards what the plant produces and what the plant has made kind of helps keep you in that realm of understanding things. I know these products have been inhaled via combustion for a long time. Sticking in that space should be better than venturing way outside of that and trying something wildly new. So most of our products are meant for inhalation in some form. We've also done a number of tinctures, tablets, and other edible products as well.
You mentioned, not putting something in there that would be deleterious to the end user, and as you know, in Pennsylvania, after 5 years of having the medical cannabis industry in place, there was a sudden investigation into components being added into inhalable products, and it was a lot of vape carts. And the some grower processors here, you could tell when you bought their product that they were putting flavors in. There's nothing in cannabis that I've ever seen that gives you pina colada or like that trademark grape, like grape soda, flavor or something like that. And it some of the product manufacturers here, like I started keeping track of some of the terpene profiles and some of the products because I wanted to see how the overall terpene profile affected me, and which products did I find to be best for creativity or things like that. And I started to see in some grower processors this rapid plummet, even in liquid live resin cartridges, where there are now less than 1% total terpenes in a product being called a liquid live resin. And yet there's other grower processors that have 16, 17%. And it was really a startling array of, here's 2 liquid live resin products with that kind of disparity in their terpene profiles?
Wow, that is a pretty large one. And I think that's reflective of lack of standardization in terms of terminology, right? So anybody can call anything they want liquid live resin. Do I really know what that means? Does it have a well-defined criteria in terms of composition as to how much might be, able to be called that in some fashion? Is it a extraction and processing methodology? Is it an end composition that gets me there? Is it a combination of both? There's nothing that stops anyone from calling any other product liquid live resin, unfortunately. But that's a wildly different range.
Right.
Really unfortunate to patients, for sure.
The company that previously had much higher levels and just kind of removed everything, from folks I've talked to that were fans of the product before, it's very flavorless, odorless, like all of the kind of trademarks of cannabis and the organoleptic properties that go along with it have just completely vanished in that vape cart, to where a dabbable product seems much more fragrant. And I was just really surprised, and I wondered if they were just kind of concerned over how the state was going to approach things, so they just kind of backed out of having a lot of terpenes in the product altogether.
Definitely unfortunate, as we understand terpenes are kind of key towards driving functionality. I think a lot of people think is it flavor, and that's what most people started saying first. Can you please add flavor to my vape cart?
Yeah.
And we would say it's effectful flavor, like it's really driving the effects, and that's kind of the predominant reason they're there. But they also have the benefit of nice, pleasant smells or taste that go along with it, and sometimes maybe not so pleasant. And too much of too much of a good thing in this case could be a bad thing. There's upper limits to where terpenes could be starting to cause irritation of the lips, the mouth, the airways, and you probably don't want really high concentrations of those. They should try and maintain a similar ratio of cannabinoids to terpenes as seen in the flower.
Okay.
And that, would be where you're much more likely to be at. So if you say a 20% THC flower has, 2.5% measured terpenes that we've got. Well, if we put those in and the vape cart's at 80, the math is easy this way. It's 80% THC, 10% terpenes.
Right.
So 10% of the terpenes we're measuring, plus or minus, it might be around there. But that gives us a little bit more of a level, that says, hey, this is what the plants provided, and probably more of what I'm expecting from an experiential standpoint. Each device and each hardware piece, though, can be very different. So 10% terpene loading in some hardware can be far more than actually some people could tolerate with their taste buds, and say that this is too strong, I don't like the flavor, I need to go with a little bit less. But that can change and alter the effects too. So each product ideally is standardized. But if I'm not, measuring, monitoring, and making sure I've got the right amount of terpenes in each one, or I don't even know what they are, I don't know how you can really standardize that type of product in a medical sense.
Right. And I'm curious, when you're making, when a customer approaches you for a novel formulation, are they trying to combine a specific selection of cannabinoids and terpenes to achieve a desired end goal, maybe a certain physiological state like relaxation or uplifting, or are they typically going after a certain flavor profile?
We get some of both, but we probably are getting more today, like driving the effects, and then can you make it taste good on top of that? Like, hey, I would like to have an effect that says it makes you feel this, fill in the blank, like relaxed, but I would like it to taste, like this type of fruit as well, or something along those lines. So there's great flexibility in what you could perform in that fashion. But I'd say it's kind of shifted. Initially, it was just taste, but we get much more, requests these days towards driving effects first, which I think is kind of a nice evolution of the industry, and really great to see, because ideally that should benefit, patients and consumers in greater fashions. The challenge is we make no claims to what they might drive in terms of effects. We don't really have any solid clinical studies on every single possible cultivar produced out in the marketplace. We're all kind of trying to take our best guesses, and you say, here, I can present you with a couple of samples. You have to go study them upon your own groups to say that if they do or do not match what you would like to market behind them, or what you may be allowed to market behind them in different states as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. That this is a fine example of our evolution as an industry. I've seen here in Pennsylvania a whole new cultivar, naming system where there's Keystone this or that, and certain cities like Punxsutawney Punch, and it's interesting because those don't exist anywhere else, because they're like geographically oriented, and yet they're hybrids of different plants and whatnot, and it really, I mean, there was already a list of cultivar names on, I think, Wikipedia or some site that was thousands, if I remember correctly, and it's getting larger. And then you have plants common to other regions that might be brought in, those genetics, and it really becomes confusing for the consumer. And I feel like I've seen a lot more of that kind of product that may be color coded to signify a certain effect or chemistry. And it sounds like you've seen kind of the same thing.
Yeah, and we published on the name game back in 2015. Now, folks could call next to anything whatever they want, but the problem is, if I'm a patient or consumer and I got Blue Dream today and it worked really well for my needs from this dispensary, if I go back in a month, do I get the same Blue Dream even though it's labeled Blue Dream? And from a chemical composition standpoint, no, most likely not always, and I might get different effects from that. So it's, is Punxsutawney, Punch, is that actually Purple Punch that's renamed, or is it something brand new that we haven't seen before in some fashion?
Right.
There's no one monitoring or regulating, which lineage or which names could be attached to which compositions. They are trying to say, I don't want names that are attractive to younger adults or to youth or children in any way. So there's maybe a little bit of how can I guide these, or say that, no, you can't have this name, but it doesn't mean it couldn't have a composition, or that I couldn't attach some sort of name that was popular from the West Coast into some, Pennsylvania cultivar that I'm producing now too. Yeah. So it's very confusing on top of confusing, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think to that same end, like you were talking about Blue Dream today versus Blue Dream, a week from now or 2 weeks from now. I think that's equally so for if you start off on flower and you really find a specific plant that works for you in whatever capacity you're looking for, and then you move to a vape pen or an extract that still carries with it that same plant name, but now the chemistry is significantly different because those same ratios of cannabinoids and terpenes that are in the plant just aren't there in the extract.
No, that's an excellent point. We've tried to demonstrate this via graphics, right? Like here's what your terpene profile looks like on the flower, and here's what it looks like when it was fill in the blank extract, live rosin, live resin, fresh frozen, whatever, direct extracts, or even, process extracts. So if I take a liquid live resin, I do a hydrocarbon extraction, I decarboxylate it, like how much does that chemistry change? How much do things leave or isomerize, oxidize, or change in some fashion? I'm definitely left with a composition in the extract that is not representative of where the flower was at. So it's really not fair to, patients that see Blue Dream in flower and Blue Dream in concentrate, thinking they're going to get just a concentrated form of the same effects. And it's definitely not necessarily the case, unfortunately. And no one's saying, hey, you can't do that. And it's okay to say this is an extract from Blue Dream, but I think it's now kind of touted that it'll have all the same pieces that Blue Dream has. It just magically took out only the cellulose and amino acids you didn't want. But that's not the case, right? It's here is, some sort of high concentration of cannabinoids with some terpenes that came from that cultivar, but it's not always representative of the chemical profile that the flower presents you with. And therefore I might get different physiological responses.
So how difficult is it to recreate like, not like as close to an exact replica of a flower terpene profile in a concentrate, in a vape cart, for example?
It would depend on your definition of exact. So it's we can do a pretty good job. We've got handles on over 50 different terpene ingredients, so you can get the cannabinoids really right. You can put 50 different or more terpene-like ingredients in there, and all of a sudden you've got control over many tens of ingredients to say this is pretty close to what you've got being presented by the flower. We've had a number of folks come back and say, wow, this really makes me feel like I do when I feel with the flower, when I consume it via inhalation. It fooled me. It smelled pretty similar. I'm surprised that you guys could get so close. We're quite impressed with where you guys have been able to take the technology. I won't say exact because you can't put every single molecule in there at exactly every single, detail piece on a molecular scale, but it is really close. And what we're seeing is you can get close enough to do the same physiological response, which is ideally the goal and ultimately fantastic from our standpoint.
So what extraction method or methods do you prefer to get terpenes?
We do not directly extract terpenes from the cannabis plant. We get ours
Okay.
from individual components. We kind of build them up from individual ingredients, so they're all high purity to begin with, and I've got great molecular control and flexibility over creating whatever we would want from that. I think, what's the best extraction method, whether you're looking at cannabinoids or terpenes, it's whatever's the most economically efficient and whatever gets you to that end desired goal. So if I'm looking for high purity limonene or high purity THC, it's how can I get there most economically efficiently, right? So that I can drive and win at the commodity game in the lowest cost. Does it mean that I can't find 5 or 10 different ways to get there? I probably can, but there's probably one or two of them that are going to be better for economic reasons, efficiency reasons, or just overall, how do I get there at an appreciable scale as I need to? And some of those questions and answers are different given state-based regulations or state-based markets and sizes that come after that. So what might work really well in a state like Massachusetts, or even a small one like Rhode Island today, very well may not work when it goes federally legal because that scale is going to be wildly different.
Right, right, and I think that that leads into another question. Nice segue. What when you once so when you guys are building out a formulation, I imagine you're starting small, sort of proof of concept, and then you need once you settle on the exact recipe for that formula, you then are trying to standardize and scale that formulation up. So, what issues arise when you need to scale up a formulation that have to kind of be reassessed?
From our standpoint, the biggest limiting factor is THC today, which really isn't that big of a concern even later down the road when everything else like kind of goes full blown scales. You can capture cannabinoids at large scales. We've got lots of folks demonstrating that in the hemp industry, even biosynthetically. So there are a lot of ways to get your cannabinoids at scale, and terpenes, they're used in all these food products. So they're already, at those, worldwide global scales. So I don't think there's any limitation on scalability from those perspectives.
Okay, okay. Um, for my last question, this is kind of like your own opinion here, but what is or are your favorite terpenes and why?
That's funny. I have small children. I was going through our little olfactory testing kit with them, and we were talking about that the other day. So I'm a fan of linalool and terpinolene. Now I'd like to say like all the terpenes are like all my children. I love them all the same. But I do like, I do like the smell of linalool and terpinolene. And I'm a fan of both of the effects that they can drive. So we often find terpinolene in, more uplifting and, kind of like you would say creativity driving types of cultivars, which is fascinating because single molecule studies on terpinolene said that it was useful for sedation in certain animal models, but that is not what you see when you combine it with cannabinoids. They're most often found in quote unquote sativa-like types of ones. I'm not a fan of indica sativa hybrid labels, but they still exist today. And linalool is just super pleasant. I love the smell of lavender and linalool itself, and I really like some of the effects that can drive towards relaxation and pieces like that. Now, just because you find a little bit of some of that, like linalool and all these cultivars, doesn't mean every one of them is driven towards relaxation and sedation. So you have to be very careful that if I see a study that says this terpene causes that effect, it doesn't mean this terpene in a cannabis composition equals that effect, or it doesn't mean that it's going to overwhelm the other ones that are there. Each cannabis composition has its own, specific profile, its own specific activity, and we really do not understand, the entourage effect or the ensemble effect very well today. Which ones go into that? It seems like many of them. How much of which ones might, accentuate or cancel out other things? We don't know that very well yet at all. And there's a lot to be had and to be found in that piece, that complex interplay, which is exciting. We know it happens, and we know that you can get there, but we definitely do not understand all the mechanisms of action in that. And I think it's an exceptionally complex picture with many receptors, many molecules, and could take, my children's lifetimes till we actually finally get a pretty good handle on some of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it's interesting here now. In Pennsylvania, I'm not sure how many states now require labeling of terpenes on products. Pennsylvania was one of two, Nevada being the other that I knew about. So maybe some others have started to do this, or maybe they voluntarily started to do it. But
Connecticut did too.
okay.
Yep.
So what's interesting to me is like you said, I think that's a great point that just be like in Pennsylvania now, when you go on and you shop at a certain dispensary's website, you can sort their products by an individual terpene. But like you said, like I also have a strong affinity for linalool, and if I shop by linalool, like I may find some products that have a 0.5% or 1% linalool in them, but they may have a bunch of other terpenes that offset those relaxing sedative effects or something like that. So I think that's a great point. When I was researching when I was doing a lot of research for a book about terpenes, I started to really find that many plants that I am interested in all kind of have some of the same dominant terpenes, and linalool was one of them. In jasmine and bergamot and lavender, and I started to really kind of look at this idea that my nose is like kind of leading me in this direction, because for some reason or another I have an affinity for this specific chemistry. And I thought that was really fascinating. I had never really delved into the different plant chemistries like that before, and it was really remarkable.
That makes perfect sense. I say the nose knows,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, you're like, you don't really recognize it, but there's great scent memory that can take you back to places if you recognize the same scent from before. And it does kind of, hey, like if labeling's not there, trust your nose, like give it a good smell and say, is this similar to what I had before? That can drive you in the right direction, much like you're describing. It's a very, very powerful effect, and your nose is an ultra sensitive detector. Like we don't have many things in the analytical world or the lab that actually can replicate that, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. If I may just sneak in one final question,
Sure.
I'm curious, where do you think that this industry needs to improve moving forward?
Product standardization. So, how can I say this is the product I've made time and time again? It will be there time and time again after that if it works for you. It is, appropriately named or distinctly named so that I can say this is my composition, and that we start to kind of all converse more clearly around complex compositional pieces. If there's pieces across different states, I shouldn't be able to just call it the same name. I should say that this is the name and the detailed profile that went with it. And I think we have to make those steps, obviously incrementally. We're not going to get to like the grand thing, tomorrow, but we do have to start making steps and taking strides in that direction so that we can start to improve how quickly and effectively we can guide new folks that are coming into the industry looking for, their ailments or their needs, what products are right for them. And that works on an adult use side as well. How do I start to guide folks, with very few choices to the right answer, as opposed to here's 100 things on my shelf. Good luck. Try one today and see if you can come back tomorrow and get the same thing. And if it didn't work, try something else. I think we've got to get past that, and that will only come through great, standardization of chemical compositions.
That's well said. Dr. Raber, I want to thank you for joining me today. Your dedication to the industry is inspiring, and your evolution from starting off as kind of a testing lab and moving forward into customized formulations and consulting, to me, shows a very insightful willingness to go with the times and where the needs were and are. So thank you for being here today.
Oh, likewise. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. And for all the work that you guys do at Terpenes and Testing. It's a fantastic effort to educate folks, and for this opportunity to educate some folks too. Really appreciate that, and definitely appreciate the support too. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And thank you all for tuning in. We will see you next time on Terpenes and Testing, the podcast. Until then, please come visit us at www.terpenesandtesting.com or visit us on one of our social media platforms. Cheers.